Hello guys, welcome back to the channel. Okay. Lie number 2. We only use 10% of our brains. We've all heard this myth. Some of us heard it for the first time in a classroom, some of us heard it from a friend, some of us heard it through the media, maybe a documentary, a TV show, or a movie. This myth is usually used in the context of highlighting longed for possibilities. If only we could access the rest of our brains, what could we accomplish? The story has been tracked to a number of different sources, but as so often happens in the shaping of public opinion, it's likely built on by successive events. Some attributed to author and philosopher William James, who wrote in The Energies of Man that we are making use of only a small part of our possible mental and physical resources. It could have originated with the work of Pierre Florence, a French physicist famous for his discoveries in the late 1800s about how the brain and the nervous system work and work together. The myth could also be related to the work of Dr. Carl Leslie in the 1920s, when Leslie removed parts of red cerebral cortex, an area responsible for higher order cognitive processing. He found the rats could still relearn some tests. This led him to hypothesize incorrectly that whole parts of the brain were not necessarily being used. Some blame the earliest neuroimages from PET and fMRI scans, which showed bright blotches on a screen with simplified explanations like this is what your brain does when you pick something up. These images typically show just one portion of the brain lighting up, leading the layperson to conclude that we only use a small portion of our brains at one time. This assumption has also been perpetuated in countless ads and movies over the last 100 years. The adoption of the book The Dark Fields, which was produced as Limitless in 2011, says we use 20% of our brain function. The 2014 movie Lucy claimed we use 10% at any given time. In 2017, an episode of Black Mirror, a show known for its research and wealth through use of facts and statistics, touted the myth, saying even on a good day we only use 40% of our brain capacity. All of these storylines were focused on the idea of unlocking our greatest, albeit hidden potential. Needless to say, this myth is pervasive, and it is not true. In a suscited NPR segment, the host plays a clip of Morgan Freeman posing in his dramatic bass voice, the what if scenario upon which Lucy is based. What if there was a way of accessing 100% of our brain? What might we be capable of? Neuroscientist David Eagleman gives a pointed response. We would be capable of exactly what we're doing now, which is to say we do use 100% of our brain. Countless evidence backs this up. Too much of it to include it all here, but Barry Berenstein, a professor of psychology at Simon Fraser University in British Columbia, describes some of the major scientific discoveries that refute this myth, which are paraphrased here. Studies of damaged brains shows that there is no single area of the brain that can sustain damage without a loss of ability. Contrary to earlier theories, brain scans have shown that all brain areas are active no matter what the activity. Even while we sleep, all parts of our brains show activity. Our brains are energy hogs. The brain takes up only 2% of space by weight and yet accounts for 20% of energy consumption, more than any other organ. We wouldn't need such an incredible amount of energy for an organ that functions at 40% or less. Scientists have also determined that the brain's regions have distinct functions that work together. After extensively mapping the brain over decades, they've concluded that there are no functionless areas of the brain. Finally, as we've learned, the brain uses a process called synaptic pruning. If we didn't use a large portion of our brains, we would expect to see large areas of degeneration. We don't unless brain diseases are present. To sum up, this myth just isn't true. In an interview with Scientific American neurologist Barry Gordon from Johns Hopkins School of Medicine in Baltimore said that the idea is so wrong it is almost laughable. Here's the truth. What I want you to take from this is that you have all the power of your brain available to you now. The utopia that each of these movies and TV shows depicts is already possible for you. While we use all of our brain, some people use their brain better than others. Just as most people use 100% of their body, there are some bodies that are faster, stronger, more flexible, and more energized than others. The key is to learn how to use your brain as efficiently and effectively as you possibly can. And by the end of this book, you'll have the tools to do so. New belief. I am learning to use my whole brain in the best way possible. Lie number 3. Mistakes are failures. When we hear the name Einstein, we think of brilliance and intellectual feats, the likes of which most of us believe will never accomplish. The nearly synonymous relationship is well deserved. Einstein did more to further the scientific field in general and physics in particular than any other scientist of our time. His discoveries have made possible some of our most important modern day technology. With such an illustrious reputation, it would be easy to assume Einstein rarely made mistakes, but that is not the case. To begin with, his development was described as slow and he was considered to be a below average student. It was apparent from an early age that his way of thinking and learning was different from the rest of the students in his class. He liked working out the more complicated problems in math, for example, but wasn't very good at easy problems. Later on in his career, Einstein made simple mathematical mistakes that appeared in some of his most important work. His numerous mistakes include 7 major gaffes on each version of the theory of relativity, mistakes in clock synchronization related to his experiments, and many mistakes in the math and physics calculations used to determine the viscosity of liquids. Was Einstein considered a failure because of his mistakes? Hardly. Most importantly, he didn't let his mistakes stop him. He kept experimenting and making contribution to his field. He is famously quoted as having said, "A person who never made a mistake never tried anything new." What's more, no one remembers him for his mistakes. We only remember him for his contributions. So why do we fear mistakes so much? It could be ingrained as school children. We were judged on our mistakes, and the number of them on any given test determined whether we passed or failed. If we were called on in class and said the wrong answer, most of us were actually too embarrassed to raise our hands again. Unfortunately, mistakes are not often used as a tool for learning. They are used as a way of measuring one's capabilities. Make too many mistakes and you fail your test or your class. We need to change that. Too many of us don't come close to our capacities because we are too afraid of making a mistake. Instead of looking at mistakes as proof of failure, take them as proof that you are trying. Beth Comstock, former vice chair of General Electric, and her team learned this when the company had to scrap a new line of products in which it had invested. Comstock, author of Imagine It Forward, Courage, Creativity, and the Power of Change, often speaks on the ever-growing demand on business and the people within them to adapt and change faster. She reflects on how she and her team were able to look at the mistakes they made not as a failure but as a major learning lesson that led to the development of a new line that moved the company forward. Instead of dwelling on the mistakes, they asked themselves what they learned. Here's the truth. Mistakes don't mean failure. Mistakes are a sign that you are trying something new. You might think you have to be perfect, but life is not about comparing yourself to anyone else. It's about measuring yourself compared to who you were yesterday. When you learn from your mistakes, they have the power to turn you into something better than you were before. Also, remember that you are not your mistakes. Making a mistake doesn't mean anything about you as a person. It's easy to jump to the conclusion that you are inherently worthless, but you make mistakes. Mistakes don't make you. Place them under your feet and use them as stepping stones to rise to the next level. It's not how we make mistakes, but how we deal with them that defines us. New belief. There is no such thing as failure, only failures to learn. Lie number 4. Knowledge is power. We've all heard the phrase knowledge is power, usually as a reason for learning, as if knowledge alone will give you power. You might have also heard this phrase used with the opposite intent, as a reason to withhold information or knowledge from another person, say in a negotiation. Although the phrase knowledge is power is commonly attributed to Sir Francis Bacon, the first known use of the exact wording was not penned until Thomas Hobbes, who acted as secretary of Bacon in his younger years, used the phrase Scientia potentia, et Latin for knowledge is power. In Latvian in 1654, he then expanded on the idea in De Corpe in 1655. Unfortunately, Hobbes' original sentiments have got short over the years. In the original, Hobbes says the end of knowledge is power, and the use of theorems is for the construction of problems, and lastly, the scope of all speculation is the performing of some action or thing to be done. Emphasis added. Put another way, knowledge is important, but it is the performing of some action that is required to make it powerful. This is where we get stuck as a culture. As discussed, we're deluged with information on a daily basis. We have more access to knowledge than we have ever had in the history of humankind, and yet this glut of information makes it more and more difficult to act. I used to believe this myth. When I was the boy with the broken brain, I wanted nothing more than to be able to learn like the rest of the kids in my classroom. But once I was able to do that, I quickly realized that Possession of knowledge wasn't going to differentiate me from the people around me. It was how I used my knowledge that would. Here's the truth. Knowledge is not power. It only has the potential to be power. You can read this book and learn everything in it, but if you don't take it and apply the knowledge, it will be useless. All the books, podcasts, seminars, online programs, and inspiring social media posts in the world won't work until you put your knowledge into action. It's easy to talk about what we learned, but I want to challenge you not to talk about it, but to show what you learned. It's better well done than well said. Don't promise, prove. Your results will speak for themselves. New belief: knowledge into action, power. Line number 5: learning new things is very difficult. When we hear the word learning, we usually think of school. A few of us have fond memories of school, even if we did well academically. School is typically a place associated with the growing pains of youth, where we felt a romantic love for the first time and probably a rejection, and where we experienced crushing boredom. For those of us who struggle in school, the added emotions of shame, doubt, and the ever-present feeling that we're too dumb to learn anything colors the word. It's no wonder that we think of learning, we think of difficulty and strife. Carol Gereder is an American molecular biologist who won the Nobel Prize in 2009 for her part in discovering how telomeres change with age, which has an enormous potential for how we understand and treat cancer. Gereder has a distinction of being a Bloomberg Distinguished Professor and a Daniel Nathans Professor, and she is a Director of Molecular Biology and Genetics at Johns Hopkins University. With such an illustrious career, one would assume that greater result through a school, but such was not the case. When I was in elementary school, I was considered a poor speller and somebody who couldn't sound out words, so I was taken into remedial classes, recalls Grader. I remember having a tutor come down and take me out of the class and bring me to a different room. It certainly felt like I wasn't as good as the other kids. It turned out she had dyslexia, a learning disability that affects part of the brain that process language. Those who struggle with dyslexia have problems identifying speech sounds and relating them to letters and words, which results in difficulty reading and sometimes speaking. Grader felt stupid and describes the situation as hard to overcome, but she didn't give up. I kept thinking of ways to compensate. I learned to memorize things very well because I just couldn't spell words. So later when I got to classes like chemistry and anatomy, where I had to memorize things, it turned out I was very good at that. I never planned a career. I had these blinders on that got me through a lot of things that might have been obstacles. I just went forward. It's a skill that I had early on that must have been adaptive. Even though school was hard at first, she found other ways to make up for her disability, and because of her ability to adapt, she became the kind of problem solver who could not only learn but could contribute to research that changed the way we view cancer. Learning was hard for her, but she figured out how to work around her disability. After all, it's not how smart you are, but how you are smart. Because Grader had to problem solve her way through learning. She now has a career that is having an impact on the world. The truth is that learning won't always be easy, but the effort pays dividends. In fact, learning should be at least a little uncomfortable, otherwise you're mostly reinforcing what you already know. If you ever try to cut wood with a dull blade, you know that it takes far more time and energy to accomplish the task than it should. In much the same way, lacking motivation or having inadequate methods will slow you down and make you feel as if learning is too hard, and we'll show you how to address those issues later in this book. The key is taking small, simple steps. Think about a stone cutter. The stone cutter may sit there and hammer away at his block of stone for what it feels like an eternity, making only small chips and dents here and there. But in one moment, the stone will crack open. Was it one time that did it? No. It was all the sustained effort that prepared the stone to split. Approach your learning like a stone cutter. It will require you to cultivate patience, to have a positive attitude, and to be adapted to your own needs. If you are the kind of learner who does best with a book in your hands, that's fantastic. But if you already know that doesn't work for you, why keep trying the same thing? Look for other ways to learn that do work for you. Know that it won't be hard, but it will require effort, though perhaps not as much as you think. The key is consistency. You must have the patience to constantly come back at it again and again. When you do, you will not only reap the rewards of your hard-earned knowledge, but you will be a better person for having cultivated the tenacity to keep trying. Here's the truth. Sometimes it is hard to learn new things. What's more accurate is to understand that learning is a set of methods, a process that can certainly be easier when you know how to learn. New belief. When you learn new ways how to learn, the challenging of learning new things can be fun, easier, and more enjoyable. Tomorrow, line number 6. The criticism of other people matters. So that's it, guys. Bye.